Dober dan tudi z moje strani in lep pozdrav vsem. Hello everybody, it's nice to be here with you. My name is Matej Nikšič and I'm an architect and urban designer. I work as a researcher at the Urban Planning Institute of the Republic of Slovenia. My intention today is to shortly present the libraries as public objects and their role within the city making. But let me first very shortly present my institution, the Urban Planning Institute of the Republic of Slovenia, as I said. It's a research institution. We are about 30 researchers here from very different disciplinary backgrounds. So we are an interdisciplinary team which tries to address different issues of the contemporary city. As I said, we are researchers, which means we're trying to understand the functioning and the constructing of the city into the depth so that we could understand the processes as well as the actors that contribute to the establishing of the good urban environments. One of our aims, of course, is to backbone the decision making in the different levels, from the national to the local municipal levels, but also to advance the knowledge on the cities in general. My short presentation of today is intending mainly in 3 points. The first one is to shortly outline the sustainable development as we understand it in urban planning. Then in the second part, we will try to understand how the architecture dimension should be addressed within the sustainable development paradigm. And in the last, the most extensive part of this presentation, we'll talk about the city making and how important the positioning of the public institutions, such as public libraries, is within the urban planning profession. And at the very end, we will also look at some good examples from the worldwide of the public libraries and try to relate these examples to the theory that I will explain at the beginning. Let me shortly introduce firstly the sustainable development paradigm. I'm pretty sure that all of us will know about what the essence of this paradigm is. But it's important for the understanding of the role that public libraries can play within the cities. The sustainable development is usually in theoretical models divided into 3 main pillars. The first one is the social sustainability, the second one environmental sustainability, and the third one the economic sustainability. This of course all has the implications for the built environments. When we talk about the social sustainability, we are trying to achieve the livable, socially just environments that will really strengthen the local communities and that will offer the same opportunities for everybody, at least in theory. We should strive for this. And if we manage to set up such environments, then the social capital that exists in the cities, of course, will also thrive. A very important aspect of social sustainability in urban development terms is to provide the public goods for the common purposes by both positioning the public institutions at the right locations, but also to make the right programming of the city, so to provide the right functions within the cities. The second very important dimension is the environmental sustainability, which in essence means that we should be respectful to ecosystems and also people within these ecosystems, especially the health of the users of the built environments. But environmental sustainability also means that we should be very respectful to the resources that are on offer to us in light of the future users, so that we don't overuse these resources. So environmental sustainability is also related to the consumption of the goods that are existing in the environments. And last but not least, the economic sustainability, which means that we are kind of dedicated to maintain the economic activities within urban and settled places, while also preserving the quality of the environment and keeping the social systems stable. So economic sustainability is directly related to both of the above mentioned pillars. What does this sustainable development mean in more concrete terms in the field of architecture and urban planning? At the level of the architecture, lots of very concrete standards have been developed so far that are trying to somehow adjust this theoretical model of sustainable development to the concrete buildings. And this relates to very different topics, which are illustrated here by showing one of these standards, which is called the LEED standard. And the LEED standard actually strives for the green building design, construction, operations, and performance. So it's not only related to the final result in terms of the building as such, as the building in its physical appearance, but also in its functioning, so how it will use the resources and how it will perform for the users, which are more untangible dimensions, but very important to achieve the green buildings at the end. As we can see here, many different aspects are important, starting with the location. How do we choose the location for the concrete building or architecture? Because this will also have very strong environmental consequences. One of them is the transportation and the energy consumption and the environmental pollution that's related to it. So this is, let's say, the first criteria that is used by this standard. The second one is the sustainability of the site itself, and this would relate to the site assessment in terms of the open spaces, the rainwater management, the heat island that the location can cause if it's urbanized or overbuilt and so on. Then we have three criteria. These are water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, and materials and resources that directly relate to the environmental performance of the architecture. The sixth one is then the indoor environmental quality. This quite directly relates to the experience that the user will have within the green building. And it's partly related to the technical issues such as lighting or air quality that we manage to assure within the building, but also to some more ambience-oriented criteria, such as good perceptual experience or the good quality views and so on. So this sixth criteria is very important for the final experience of the user within the building. Then there are two more criteria. One is innovation, because all this standardization is actually aiming to also improve the standard in the longer term. So by assessing the proposed architecture, we are always also thinking what new the architecture is trying to provide or to bring into the profession. So innovation is very important criteria. And again, last but not least, it's the regional priorities, which relates to the very concrete context of each building that we are trying to propose and to construct, and relates to the conditions or the constraints that exist in the local environment where the building will be set up, and may not be covered by this rather theoretical or general standard, which is actually meant to be used around the globe. So this is just one illustration how we are trying to address the sustainable development at the architectural level. As I already mentioned, a very important aspect is also the scale of the city, so the aspect of the urban planning. And to make it very simple, I'm listing here the three very relevant topics that we are trying to address when we are placing and planning the new public buildings and public facilities within the city. The first one is the morphological structure of the city. The second one is the functional structure of the city. And the last one is the allocation of the so-called thematic and unthematic tissues within the city. Let's have a very short inside view what this relates to. The morphological structure is actually related to the physical organization of the city in terms of its morphological patterns. The morphological pattern relates to the physical structure of the parts of the city. And here on the right-hand side, we can see the example of Ljubljana's morphological model. Those who know Ljubljana will know that Ljubljana is a radiocentric city, so it has a very distinctively positioned city center. And then from the city center or to the city center, the main access roads run from different directions. And then along these different access roads, you would have, in theory at least, higher densities, so the morphological patterns are denser, while towards the hinterlands of these main access roads, the density would somehow decrease. What's very important within this morphological structure, of course, is not only the morphological tissue, but also the connections that would be connecting different parts of the city. And at the same time, so it's not just the function of connecting, they also serve as the main network of perceiving the city. Why is this important within the discussion we will have later on? Because along these main access roads and the main connectors within the morphological structure, usually also the main public buildings would be positioned. However, the physical or the morphological structure is not the only important aspect to be taken into account when we are trying to understand the role of the positioning of the public institutions within the city territory. Another important issue is the functional structure. This partly relates in urban planning to allocation of the uses around the city. Here they are marked with the red color, and only one of these uses is shown. It's the so-called central use, where different functions would be mixing. But the functional structure also relates to how will we set up different centers or functional nodes within the city, and how the hierarchy of these central centers will be established within the city. On this image on the right-hand side, this is marked by the circles. These are the so-called local centers on the example of Ljubljana. As we can see, they are of different levels. Some of them are more important, some of them are less important. But it's important to note that they are kind of the centers of the activities in different parts of the city. And again, these are also the places where we would usually place the public buildings of the type of the public libraries as well. And then another very important topic are so-called thematic and unthematic tissues, which I mentioned already. In this image, we can see how these tissues are actually distributed around the city. Let me just shortly explain what the thematic and unthematic tissues are. The thematic tissues are actually the parts of the city that have a common theme as their leading identity bearer. For example, these are the areas that would have the prevailing housing use or prevailing production uses and so on. So they are quite homogeneous in their both functional and also physical appearance. While the anthematic tissues are the tissues that are standing out. So they are kind of out of the box, so to say. They are very unique in their appearance, but also in their functions. And again, it's very important how we actually distribute these thematic and anthematic tissues around the city. Some of them, of course, are predefined by the historical development of the city, while the new ones, of course, are newly constructed by the urban planning procedures. And by saying this, it's also important to understand that, for example, when we are trying to find the appropriate place for the new local library, besides taking into account the morphological structure of the city and the functional structure of the city, it's also very important to understand the anthematic level of the city. Because the public library, by its prominence in the appearance and also the function, is by definition part of the anthematic tissue of the city. As we can see on this image, on the case of Ljubljana again, this leveling or positioning or distribution of thematic and anthematic tissues within the city is quite, I would say, not very well balanced. There's no clear image what the outstanding areas in the suburbs of Ljubljana would be. However, Ljubljana has, as I said, very strong city center, and this is, as a whole, a very anthematic tissue in a way. But in the planification endeavors in the future, we should also strive for more clear and more balanced structure of these thematic and anthematic tissues around the city. So this was some very basic background in terms of the architectural and urban planning issues that we are trying to address within the urban planning. And now we come to the core topic. I'm running a bit late with my timing, but I will keep it short from here on. The contemporary public library has very different functions within the contemporary urban planning, as I said. We can see here on this image that these roles and functions are very diverse within this sustainable development paradigm. Some of them would relate to the social sustainability, which means that the public libraries are always kind of social hubs, which are trying to set up the local life and also to boost the local communities, among others, to boost their proudness. They're the community proudness anchors, as we call this in urban planning. Then there is a very important environmental dimension. For example, when we are trying to refurbish or build a new public library, it's very important to promote these nature-based solutions for the design of the buildings, because this is how we are also teaching the users of the city how the future of the city should be designed and how the architecture should be done to be less environmentally problematic. The public libraries are also the promotions of the technological advancements. So by constructing or designing the public libraries, we can also show how the new technologies can advance the urban environments in terms of the, again, less environmental burdens to the environment. And maybe above all, it's also an opportunity how we can address the behavioral change, which is very important within the green development strategies. The public libraries are an excellent place where we can teach people how they should change their behavioral modes. And we will see this shortly in the case studies which I will show. Maybe one important aspect to also mention here is the opportunity that public library in the city presents for the promotion of the urban heritage. Very often the public libraries in the good urban planning practice would be established in already built up areas, so they are kind of the regeneration schemes, which means that they use the already existing buildings and they try to promote the importance of keeping the urban heritage for the next generations, not only to keep the memory of the development of the city, but also to reduce the costs of the construction. because by the theory and the statistics, the reconstruction is always cheaper and less environmentally problematic as the regeneration or redesign of the already existing buildings. Let's now really fly across some examples around the world. This is just the topic that I was mentioning. A good example from Tilburg, where they have established a combined local library, but also the local community center in one of the ex-industrial buildings. And this has become a very important local hub, even more so because it's very well related and integrated into the city's transportation network. A very good example to see if you will have opportunity. One very important aspect which I did not mention so far is also the relation between the building which has the public function, in this case from Charlotte again the library, and the open spaces that surround it. If the architects and urban planners are skillful enough, they will understand this relation between the open space and the indoor space in terms of the public usage, because if we manage to interlink them, so if the library is not only an introverted public space, but is very well related to the surrounding as well, this will additionally generate the local life and the local vibe in the communities. And in this case, the local libraries can really become the places when the local life will thrive. Another very important aspect, and we are coming back to this anthematic tissue of the city, which I mentioned at the theoretical introduction. This is an example from Vienna, so not very far from us. It's the bibliothek of the university, but you can see that its design is very outstanding, very unique. It's a very distinctive architecture, and it became a landmark within the city. Even if it serves primarily the needs of the university, it's a real city landmark. And the wise cities take this advantage into account and really design public buildings, also public libraries, in a distinctive way, and then use it as part of the city branding, which is very important to boost the economic activity of the city. As I already mentioned, the public buildings, including the public libraries, are very good anchor or starting point to make people change their behaviors. This is an example from Berkeley. And if you look more closely to the front yard of this library, you can see that it's really designed for the green mobility. So people are really invited to use this public building with the green mobility options, in these terms, in this case, the bikes and walking. This really has to be taken into account whenever we are trying to refurbish, so renovate or redesign an existing building or building a new one. We should really communicate the important issues of the future green development by providing the new options, the green options, to the users of these places. Nowadays, I think we cannot think of the public building accessibility anymore by the private motorized traffic, which is still the case in Slovenia, unfortunately. But we really have to kind of softly force the users to come there by green mobility. Another example from Poland, it's the University of Warsaw, which is a very good example how by choosing the architectural technologies, or actually technologies, and integrating them into the architectural design, the library on itself is trying to promote the new dimension of architecture, which is more environmentally friendly. In this case, they really try to achieve the local production of the energy, but also they regulate the flow of the water very well by this design. Another example of this case from Vancouver, with the central library in the city. And as you can see, even if the library is positioned quite centrally and there is not much space to do something around the library, they tried to use the roof as the kind of nature-based solutions laboratory, and they're trying to really promote this green dimension to the architecture. Last but not least, the public institutions and also public libraries are kind of a chance to set up the new local nodes, the centrality within the city. I mentioned at the beginning that we have the problem here in Ljubljana because we don't have very well developed local centers. And by providing such public programs, also reading in the public space, we can really establish the new nodes of the local communities. I'm also showing this example to make us aware that the public library does not have to be a big institution, a big building in itself. It can be a very small intervention in physical terms, but it can really have a very big impact on the local life. At the very end, I would like to stress out another important thing which I think has to be put light on, and this is how we are achieving the good public buildings and also good public libraries. I cannot imagine coming to good solutions without the very interdisciplinary approaches. In the case of establishing the public libraries, this of course will by definition include the librarians, the architects, the urban planners, so everybody who really is trying to establish this function in the city. And I'm mentioning just some of the professions. Of course, the interdisciplinary approach will take into the team many other professions as well, and they will do this job in collaboration from the very beginning. So it should not happen that the librarians would work their own stuff in terms of defining which functions should the library have, what the capacities should be, and then the urban planners would only say, okay, we have the location there, let's do it there. But they should really start thinking together from the beginning what the new library can mean for the city or for the local community or for just one neighborhood and so on. This really should be an interdisciplinary endeavor. And maybe even more importantly, because it's the public building, we have to take into account the opinions of the users of the space, the end users, which is of course the general public. Again, this should happen at an early stage. The future users, so the local community or the city residents, should be taken into the processes at the beginning. So the earlier, the better. This brings me to the very end of my presentation. I might be a bit too long, but I hope my insights were helpful for the discussion, which we will have later on, and I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you.